Massive welcome to all of our subscribers, first-time watchers and LinkedIn viewers for a deep dive into the changing role of security governance with leading CISO Jake Bernardes. Jake's the CISO at Gutsy, a technology leader with significant experience in funding rounds, delivering security transformation and building best-in-class security functions. He's passionate, innovative and pragmatic with an understanding of what makes businesses tick and how to take them from startup or growth phase to enterprise level security capabilities, opening doors to new customers and opportunities along the way. He's also been a speaker at a couple of our events now here in the UK. It's an absolute pleasure to have him on the show. And as I said, we're going to be discussing the changing role of security governance and how CISOs are having to adapt. So stay with us for the open Q&A. But before we bring him on, and for those that are new to the channel, I'm your host, Simon Linstead, and by sharing stories and best practices over the last few months, it's led to over 171,000 views here on YouTube by you, our amazing 8,609 subscribers. So a huge thank you for your engagement. And if you'd like to support the wider InfoSec Live community, or indeed buy me a cheeky decaf coffee, we do have a way you can show your appreciation here on our YouTube channel with 3 tiers of membership, allowing you to show your support in any way that you can. But whether you join or not, being here and engaging with our content is what really matters. So if you're enjoying it, please hit that thumbs up button. And if you're watching this live, please do drop any questions you might have in the chat for Jake. Okay, time for me to stop rambling on. Let's get Jake on. Good afternoon.
Hey mate, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm just realizing that whenever people say, give me like an intro to read about you, I need to stop saying, go to my LinkedIn, because it sounds a bit like the start of War and Peace.
Do you know that's actually one of the shortest ones I've done this week, actually, Joe. So I don't think it's too bad at all. It is a bit of a cop out though when you say, "Can you get it from my LinkedIn?" I'm going to go with
I'll write you one proper for next time. I promise.
Thanks, mate. But look, firstly, thank you for supporting InfoSec Live, the community, and everything you've done for us the last year or so since we met. It really is much appreciated. Things have changed for you a little bit recently. New role, new year. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that before we start digging into the topic today?
Yeah, so around the Christmas period, I moved on from Wistic, my former employer, and parted ways and moved on to Gutsy, which is a brand new company. The team that lead and build Gutsy built and sold Twistlock. For those that are in the security space, that became Prisma, which is a Palo Alto product, for about $500 million a number of years ago, and came back with a new problem to solve, which is the kind of concept around how we improve, how we tackle processes rather than the people and technology aspect of security. But I'm sure we'll get into that in more detail.
Excellent. And you've been there how long now?
Oh gosh, not very long. What is it like? We're in February now, aren't we? So like a month.
A month. So baptism of fire, or all good so far?
No, it's all. I mean, it's a different challenge, right? I think I've worked at various size organizations. Gutsy's very early stage, so that comes with both its pros and cons. Pros, it means you can get your hands into many things. You can go back to actually doing stuff as a security team of one and actually get back into like things like GitHub and actually doing technical work. Cons are there isn't really a budget and a team, right? Until you've got a decent amount of paying customers who can justify that spend. And in a smaller team, there's obviously a different way of working. There aren't the same levels of kind of, I suppose, enterprise features and kind of roles and responsibilities you're used to. So it's different. It's neither positive nor negative. It's exciting to be part of something small and interesting and disruptive again.
Yeah, I mean, not a CISO here, but having worked for massive enterprise firms and having my own startups and working for other startups, I know what environment I enjoy and thrive in more. And it's definitely the smaller businesses. Wearing multiple hats on a daily basis might not be everyone's cup of tea, but if that's something that you enjoy, startup life is for you, Jake, right?
Definitely. Yeah, if you're willing to just have a title which is only a title and means nothing in response to what you actually do, then startup life is definitely for you.
Absolutely. Okay, well, today we're going to talk about the changing role of security governance, and in particular, I suppose, how that affects the role of the CISO and how that's changing as well. Do you want to kick us off with that?
Yeah, look, I think starting with the CISO role full stop before we dig into security governance is an interesting piece because it's changing in lots of ways. And I've noticed that over probably the last 3 to 5 years, but more microcosmically in the last 2 years. I think firstly, it's more encompassing and broader. It's not even just security anymore. Like most people I know also now cover IT separately. They'll cover various parts of dev. They might own the SRE team. Like there's lots of different things in our report into security, which security is required to do. So I think number one, it's a much broader role. I think number two, you've got to be much more commercially astute. It's like we're now more heavily involved in the sales process, even when it's not a security product. Whether that's in developing the compliance and security posture that allows you to market faster, or whether that's responding to the questionnaires that come in, or whether it's actually facilitating different marketing angles or approaches for how you use security as a kind of rhetoric to sell your products. So I think that's number two. And then number three is much more financially driven. Like it used to be, what are you doing in security? How do you make things more secure? Or I'd like a shopping list, please, of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And as long as there's rationale behind that, makes sense. But in a different economy, and it's not just the economic pressures of the last year, but I think in a different economy of leadership these days, you've got to make commercial sense and financial sense of what you want to do. So, like, what is this?
Would you say then that perhaps the industry as a whole hasn't been particularly good at that? Historically,
I think
this is me playing devil's advocate with not an experienced hat on, but looking at the industry, looking at the spend over the past few years, looking at the amount of breaches that are still happening. I think the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing and expect different results, right?
100%. I think for a long time, security was, and it was okay with being a cost center, right? It was money you sunk to do stuff that you had to do to make sure you were secure and protected from a data breach. You didn't end up in front of Congress or with a massive civil lawsuit. But it's not anymore. Like it's got to shift. Like most departments, if you really want to make a role for yourself and a place for your kind of team in the world, you've got to move from being cost center to profit center. So you've got to start to work out how you demonstrate, how you bring value. And that's difficult. A lot of CISOs don't come from that background. So having to develop new skills to be able to work out how you do that. How do you show a CEO or a CFO that what I do actually helps the company generate revenue when it's not the traditional I sell stuff reason?
Yeah, completely. I mean, the other thing that always sticks in my throat a bit when it comes to terminology is the ROI figure. When they talk about what's your ROI on your security spend? Well, how about what's your debt management spend look like? Because that's really what you're doing, isn't it?
I mean, ROI is a complex thing in itself, right? It's like ROI is so subjective. And I think that's part of it. If you're going to be good at this game, like I said, the change of all the CISO has become much more financial and commercially astute because that's the part of the game you have to learn to play. You have to be able to tell the ROI story, tell the profit center story, tell various stories. You have to become an articulate storyteller to basically expound on what your team does, why they do it, and why it's valuable.
100%. I'm just going to bring this question up, which is why I've flicked you up to the top of the screen in case you wondered why you were moving around there, Jake. Prashant, is security governance just an IT function, or is there a justification in saying it's a business function and should be driven by someone outside of a technical function? Thanks, Prashant.
I think it's a valid point. I think it's got to be owned by security. I think security governance, compliance, they're all broad words that get spread out, privacy, where there's multiple people who might have input to that, but somewhere's got to own it. And I think when it comes to governance and compliance efforts, full stop, particularly with security governance, it's got to be owned by wherever security falls. If that's to a head of security, a CISO, a VP, a CIO, a CTO, wherever it is, someone has to take the buck stops with me approach. And I think that has to be in cyber for me.
Yeah, okay, that's a fair point. Where else do you see the massive shifts in governance at the moment, Jake?
So in a broad regulatory perspective, you've obviously got the SEC stuff that happened in the US where they changed what were the requirements on reporting, and in doing so really changed the requirements on visibility and forced a lot of people to have to do more to respond to that. Put yourself in a place now where if you look at, say, like the Uber or the SolarWinds or Microsoft, wherever it might be, pick a breach from the last like 36 months. There's a lot of invisible sections, which I suppose is the only way to say the opposite of visibility, where at the time there wasn't accountability. Now, I think sometimes we go a bit too far the other way. I'm not sure CISOs should stand in front of Congress or in front of civil lawsuits failures that were made through technology or through teams or whatever it might be. I think that sometimes there's a difficult challenge there. But that's one side of it. It's definitely changing in the US. I think in the EU, it's changing, right? There's the NIS2 framework, NIS, not to be confused with NIST, which is similar in its approach to the SEC in terms of putting more responsibility on companies to show how do you do what you do, how do you consider risk, like what do you base your decisions on, how do you report, how do you show that you're considering your supply chain? Like there's lots of areas to that. So I think security governance overall is becoming more holistic in its individual like nature. Like each individual regulation now covers more than it used to. But also it's all encompassing. Like it used to be, if you were in financial services, you cared about PCI DSS, if you were a payment processor and nothing else. If you were in the government, you did FedRAMP in the US and nothing else, right? And there was a UK group that standard. If you're in healthcare, you do nothing in the UK and you had to do HIPAA in the US, right? There was all these specific standards, but I think now it's very hard to not have one. It's very hard to not do any form of governance and compliance work. It's very hard to not demonstrate you do something. Because even if you're not selling a product where you want to say, this is how I show I'm secure, like punters now want to see that you're secure. If they're buying shoes or sunglasses, whatever it is from you, they want to know that their data is secure. Because in the end, if a breach happens and they see it in the news, someone somewhere is going to join that ambulance chasing bandwagon and form a lawsuit, which is going to put it onto your doorstep. And at that point, you've got to be able to demonstrate that you did A, B, C because of 1, 2, and 3.
And historically then, that's been, I suppose, a mismatch of spreadsheets and different pools of information dotted across the company that you have to pull together to report, or has it been more seamless than that? And the question I'm getting to is AI changing that, the readiness of that information for you to pull out for the board?
Yeah, look, what the question that just got asked is probably a good lead into an answer, right? And they're talking about elevation across companies. There's an increased respect. People are starting to get it. Like, why is it vital? And why is it not about ticking boxes in spreadsheets? And I think that was interesting. So what you've seen is a move from a spreadsheet to a GUI-based spreadsheet where you could cross-map across standards to a world where actually you can now use compliance platforms, right? There's Anecdotes, Banter, SecureFrame, there's tons of them out there. And what they allow you to do is to automate that through connecting via APIs to various applications and showing your compliance posture. Now, that's a great step, and they'll leverage AI technology to make that a more seamless transition, to give you more insight into that data, the concept that you can question or interrogate your posture at will and in real time. But where Gutsy comes in, the reason I came is I think what's interesting is we focus on, so you talk about security and you talk about 3 things: people, processes, technology. Yeah. I've talked a lot in webinars about people, right? Whether there's a skills gap, how you hire, who you hire, the challenges of hiring, like when to hire, like all that kind of stuff, right? I think that's been done to death. I think the other side of kind of technology is almost done to death, because all the time we're looking for automation, integration, AI, big data, like scalability, elasticity, whatever it is, right? Whatever the buzzword of the day is, that's what we're trying to do, to apply technology to make everything better. But I think of it as like when I was recently grounded at an airport with my kids on the way to a skiing holiday in France. And
on the way,
yeah. But no, the pilot very kindly said, right, are there any kids on the plane? They can come into the cockpit and have a look, which I'm pretty sure is not allowed to happen anywhere outside the UK. I think we have probably laxer laws around cockpit control. But they came in and there were some red lights on the dashboard and lots of green ones. And my little boy said, what are those red lights? Like, why are they there? So they're indicators of these things. And when they go green, then we're good to go. So basically saying, like, there's a few things there that needs to be corrected. Once the plane has fixed them or once we've reset the system, they'll go green, we'll get permission, we're good to fly. And it made me think that often as security leaders, that's how we look at the world. We want more dashboards, we want more metrics, we want more indicators, we want more red lights. Because when we get those red lights, we go and fix them, right? We put a plaster or a Band-Aid on the cut. We have that dam analogy where we're plugging fingers in and the water's trying to stop the water. Yeah. But the problem with that is we're fixing the outcome, we're not fixing the cause. So there's nothing to stop that happening again. Like if my daughter fell off a bike because the wheel's not correctly aligned, me putting a Band-Aid on her knee doesn't stop her falling off it the next time she gets on a bike. No. And I think similarly in security, we've gone to this point where people, processes and technology, we said hire people, put tech on top of them and it'll work. And we forget there are processes that lead to outcomes. So where Gutsy comes in is saying, actually, you know what? A lot of these times we're doing things and we don't really know why it's breaking. Sometimes we don't even know what we're doing. Like I've spoken to a lot of CISOs who will say, this is how vulnerability management in my org works. We've got Sneak and that shows vulnerabilities. And then we'll go to Jira and we'll create a ticket. We'll go to GitHub and we'll work it. will then go back and retest it, show it's gone, close the ticket, and fantastic. Or they'll go to bug bounty hunting, and I know Bug Crowd are good friends of yours. They'll use Bug Crowd where it'll show a bug. They'll have a team there that will triage it and say what it is or what it isn't. Create a ticket, GitHub work it, close it out, go back to Bug Crowd, close it out, start again, right? But often what they think they do isn't what they do. So what we do is we connect via APIs and integrations to various applications in that stack. Say they describe it, we'll stick them in. And we'll say, this is what actually happens. This might be what you think happens. This is what actually happens. This is the period it takes between the initial event being triggered in Sneak to the time that your team triaged it and created a Jira ticket. This is the time it took between the Jira ticket to the GitHub commit and approval to reversing out and closing. And then we'll also say what's interesting is you saw 300 vulnerabilities identified, but then why are there only 200 remediations? What happened to 33% of them? And most of the time, the CISO doesn't know because they just see remediation happening. It's only when you dig into the process that you go, oh, actually, now there's probably problems in that. And if you look at traditional methods, you go back to your spreadsheet, you get Splunk, massive data set, and you start looking and say, okay, let's pull everything in from every tool we've got and find out human element. Let's do some digging. Let's model it. Let's build some pivot tables. We'll work out what went wrong. We can automate that. And that's what's cool about Gutsy. We show people and say, well, here's what happened. When it got to Jira, you assigned to someone in GitHub who did the work, waited for the approval flow. No one ever approved it. Why? Because the approval left the business and we never reworked it. Or maybe it went to Jira, someone looked at it, they put it in a queue that doesn't exist anymore. Or it might be as simple as you forgot to close the ticket at the end. Right? So what I think we're got to get to, and I don't want to spend the whole time being a product pitch, but it does resolve one of the questions, which is when you talk about is security governance or is GRC really that important? It's about going back into understanding processes, not just technology and people, and fixing a business effectively from the inside. Like CISO's biggest fear are the unknown unknowns, the thing you don't know that you don't know. And I think the concept is trying to allow people and CISOs and leadership to know it, like to know whatever they don't know so that they can make decisions and deploy resources and people and money based on the areas that they need to fix, not the things that they think they need to fix or whatever the biggest trend is recently.
So it's more visibility, granular visibility for the leadership team then.
It's granular visibility with actionable insights. Because granular visibility could just mean here's a whole damn data dump.
Yeah, which is fine, but if you've got no resources or any guidance as to what to do, it's pretty useless.
It needs to give you insights to tell you this is what to give you kind of real visibility that can then lead to accountability. It says, I know where my problems are, so I know what I should do to fix them. And that's accountability. That's getting to security governance element where you are accountable for fixing or not fixing, as the case might be, the stuff that you know is broken. If you don't know it's broken, you're up the creek with no paddle at that point.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. So is there anyone else who does similar to Gutsy in the market, or are they quite unique?
Right now, no. So process mining is not new. Solonis, a company in Europe, along with a few others, do process mining predominantly for ERP. So looking through how like your whole sales or kind of production cycle works and looking at elements where you could save time and money and efficiencies, but applying it to security and to risk tools, we're the only ones that do it.
Okay, it's interesting. With the need for more granular information, as you said, with actionable insights, how do you see the role of the CISO adapting and changing to fit that? Is it back to more of the business acumen that you were talking about earlier, or are there other skills that CISOs are going to have to learn or pull harder on than they have done in the past?
I think accountability becomes one, and being able to make very strategic decisions. Like historically, you just kind of actioned everything in kind of a traditional process or practice approach, where these are the things that were done on this basis, in this frequency, on this cadence, based on these level of details being required. Now, I think the opposite is now true, that you have to then base your decisions not just on the classic risk-based approach, quote unquote, but what's actually going on. So I think that becomes really important. I think the second side of it then leads to saying you have to be much better, not just business acumen, but being able to work with the wider business. Because very rarely do these processes isolate themselves within security. Look at like employee offboarding. That's a classic one where access is not properly removed and leaves you with residual access to various environments or applications. Now, that requires me to work with HR, IT, dev, potentially. Like there's multiple teams. So then that makes the CISO role become more about executive communication than it does purely about security action, where it was.
I love that you used that example, because I had a call, I'm not going to say who it was with another security leader earlier on this week, who told me they were still using 5 platforms they had logins for from their employer 6 years ago, which I thought was quite relevant to that point, Jake.
But even more interesting, right, that we also, the access point, I mean, we're on a tangent now, but who cares? The access point is not, we always think about people, right? And we don't think about machine access too. The relevance of the fact that now we have so many API connected applications, spun up machines for various demo or whatever purpose, right? And we don't actually consider that those are really relevant. So removing access is not just a process of removing people, but also understanding all of the things that are attached to that identity that may not be directly
need to be there.
To that person. Yeah. What did they build in the meantime that we now need to consider getting rid of?
It's very, very true. What do you see the biggest changes happening over the next year or two in this space then, Jake?
So AI will taper and then dramatically increase in terms of what really works. At the moment, AI is used everywhere. I was at Blackout and RSA last year, as I know you were in various capacities, and what you saw was AI written everywhere. Yeah. And if you really asked someone, it sounded like they were giving you the motto for the Paralympics and just kept saying bigger, faster, stronger together. Like, none of it really made sense.
I like that song, though. It's a good song.
Yeah. So I think what we'll get is companies are going to be found out and have to start. We'll start to see where AI is really applied in a valuable and useful way in security and risk. And we'll start to see an increase in that, probably in the compliance platforms, I think most likely. So I think that's number one. That will be followed by greater levels of granular compliance and governance around the use of AI. It's still very much a Wild West. That is a Daft Punk song, Alana, you're right. It's very much a Wild West kind of world where at the moment, and you've met Lasso, right, which is a company in the AI space. They actually model themselves as cowboys.
I love their branding. I think it's
I want to have. But I think that's kind of one piece we'll have to look at. And then I think also we've got to tackle this kind of like piece around what is automation when it's useful versus when it's not, and consider the use of AI inside of not just automation, but wider security practices. Like the fact of where is Copilot's place in the world? Secure, like AI-based coding, is it good or is it not? And where does it and doesn't it apply? We're still in a testing world. So I think a lot of the next 12 months will be focused around AI governance. But I think that will probably then spawn another wave of privacy governance. GDPR is now quite old. And AI existed, but was not in its modern implementation at the time it was written. And personal data has now become much more valuable. It was valuable before, so like you could build strategic marketing campaigns and harness my data to keep me on Facebook for longer. But it's now valuable because it can feed and develop models that can create really commercially valuable products. So I think that one will have to be tackled in the future. But who knows? Like I said, the world changes so quickly when something new comes to play that I could be.
Do you think, I'm just going back to, you're talking about the recent SEC guidelines, I think it was early last year now, and then we saw, all the CISOs that were being potentially dragged through court, and all of a sudden it was, maybe we don't want a seat at the board table. Do you think there's been a bit of an awakening among some of the CISO community as to what it actually means to be on the board, and whether you need to be on the board in this role? What are your opinions on that, Jake?
It's interesting. I think I've seen both. So I was very much a dominant figure of the leadership team at Wistic. I'm less so. I'm kind of a tier below. I got to the moment where, like, you go to our page, you'll see the leadership team is predominantly commercially driven. And I think that often makes sense strategically for the business, but it also offers the CISO a degree of protection. Yeah. There is a world in which I think that you get a lot of people, particularly the CISOs who come from an audit or commercial background, I want a voice in the room, but I don't want to be the scapegoat facility.
I don't want, what is it? With great power comes great responsibility.
It's not even right. It's not even that, right? It's that when a breach happens, there are a lot of parts that have happened. There has been errors in PM, errors in dev. Most of the time, I find it hard to believe the CEO is not aware. The CTO is certainly aware. There might have been mistakes in the SRE or in the commercial, like the actual platform teams, but it always falls at the CISO door. And I think there's got to be a balance that says if you're going to give that level of risk and vulnerability to someone, you have to give them then also the biggest level of voice, responsibility, and budget in the room too. And I don't think that necessarily is the right thing to do. So I think it's better to have a position where you have a voice and an input which is valid and heard and listened to and used and funded, but at the same time, not that you are almost the poster child for the business should anything go wrong. Because that's what has happened, and we've seen historically. We've seen CISOs who get held for things, but if you really dig into detail, it's easy to say it was their fault, they missed A, B, and C. But like when go back to my dam analogy, if you're plugging 1,000 holes, like you missed that one in the top left corner.
Of course, give me a break.
Yeah.
give me a break. Gregor, great to see you. It's been too long, my friend in Germany. I'm coming to Germany, maybe with Bug Crowd later this year to host an event, Gregor. So I would love to catch up with you to see whereabouts you are and see if we can actually meet up face to face finally. But question is, how is the risk viewed in using LLMs and the uncertainty in their training and the balance between open source and commercial AI? Good question.
Interesting. First point. If you go to Germany, let me know, Simon, because I happen to actually speak German. I'd love to meet Gregor and go to an event in German.
Can you? Well, I can. Wo is the Bahnhof? I think that's all I can remember from school.
Yeah, you might find the station. That's all as far as you go. Anyway, so this is an interesting question. So as you'll know, like OpenAI leads the pack on AI implementations, and they changed their privacy policy and so forth to mean that even at an individual user level, you can opt out from being included. Enterprise contracts now basically don't say you're being used for the wider kind of learning process, but you're actually being just used for your own personal environment for development. The reality is we don't know. Like, I'm going to be honest at this point. Like, you're held to people's word. How tested that reality is, I think it's a slightly shady kind of comment to make, but I don't know if that's true or not until someone actually pokes it and sees.
Yeah.
I think from a training perspective, it's about what you want to contribute. We want to improve AI because it improves society in the long run, and we need to give it valuable and real data to enable it to improve itself, or to train and to learn and to develop. So I think it's about making sure that the stuff that we give it is useful, but is not commercially at risk from either ourselves, our customers, or people who wouldn't want to be subscribed to it. In the open source versus commercial model, I think, again, it's kind of a hybrid piece right now. I don't think there's actually necessarily much difference between them other than the commercials behind what they offer and often the contracts that back them. So I said, if you look at commercial AI, generally, while it's more expensive, it comes with a greater degree of governance or compliance and controls around it than open source does. And there's a lot more gray areas around open source, other than the fact that you built it and hosted it yourself in that kind of realm. So it's a difficult one. LLM security, I think, is something we have to tackle. There's a lot of companies popping up right now trying to deal with how you mask that data. So basically saying, like, your data, and Lasso is one of them, saying that basically you have a whole volume of data that's going to go into an LLM. You want and you're happy for it to be developed and learn from it, but you don't want your PII to be in it. So how do you mask that in between to make sure that what you're giving to it is effectively pseudo-anonymized data? That kind of stuff is probably going to become very popular in the next 12 to 18 months, and that will probably be the solution to that problem.
Layman's question from me. Gregor, you make me laugh. Grobatic, I actually thought that was a brand of watch. So this is how rubbish this is how rubbish my German is. The data in the current language models is what, 3 years out of date, roughly?
No, there are some. No, there are some which are up to date and using real-time data. It depends on what they're doing and who they're doing it for and what data contracts they're in place. But yeah, it's becoming more.
Is that more on the commercial side that you can get the more up-to-date data, or is that across the piece?
No, even across the board now they're starting to ingest stuff, which is much more recent than 3 years. That was when OpenAI first came to platform. It was outdated, but as they released newer versions, it became more and more concurrent with the reality of what's actually happening. But yeah.
Okay, and is AI going to take over the world? I remember the film I, Robot with Will Smith. I wake up sweating about it sometimes with my virtual reality headset still on, laying in bed.
So I don't know if I've said this to you before, but I've certainly said to other people before, and I'm coining it almost as a phrase, that I don't believe AI is going to take over the world and kill us all, but I do believe AI might lead to us all killing each other.
Quicker.
So I think that the relevance behind that is, like, you think about how social media has led so many people to so many polarized, opposite, and very, very distinct viewpoints at times, very extreme viewpoints.
Got a big year of elections coming up this year in the UK and US.
Well, I know, because there's roadworks everywhere, so I can tell there's elections coming up.
Absolutely,
once AI learns how to understand human beings and to point them faster and more accurately down a path, then we only get to positions where we're more polarized if it's applied to that kind of thought process or those kind of applications, and that could lead to war. Like, you only have to look at what's going on in the Middle East right now to how strongly that is being polarized, and how both sides or multiple sides are using social media to attack the minds of people that they can get access to draw them to their form of thinking. It's really interesting.
It's interesting, and also very scary, isn't it?
Oh, it's terrifying.
Very scary. I mean, the whole world is controlled by social media, it feels now. I think, as a parent, I do worry. I worry for the future generation, especially the fact that no one seems to be able to read a full article and understand anything anymore. All we can do is read a headline and then make an assumption that headline's true. I think that's I've said this to you before. I think, Jake, as well. It all went wrong back in the late 80s when VHS video recorders suddenly got Video Plus, and no one had to know how anything worked anymore. And
I think it really went wrong. I think it went wrong when we realized that TikTok was developed purely because people thought Instagram videos were too long.
I know.
That's when society went wrong. It was shorter and more to the point. Gregor asked another question, actually, if we've got time.
He has. Well, we've got about 3 minutes left. So shall we use that as the last question?
Yeah, throw his question up.
There we go.
Because this is an interesting topic. So, Gregor, I've heard this and been asked this a lot. I don't think it's true. There's still a lot of subjectivity in how you deal with security, how you address risk, how you understand human vectors. In the end, AI can only mimic the things that it already knows. It can't mimic the future. And that's where we're at. Yes. And there are new concepts around how you attack, around how you defend, around what risk is, around how you apply governance. There's so many subjective areas where I've looked and its decision making is still nowhere near on par with what a human being would do. I think it will automate and replace lots of kind of mundane, repetitive functions, whether that's vulnerability management, or whether that's vendor risk assessments, or whether that's more penetration testing. But it'll never replace the people. The people will then just be deployed into different areas. If I was told that my guys didn't have to do A, B, and C, I could find 3 more things for them to do that were more valuable to me. Now knowing that the things that they have to do could be done by something else. So I think it facilitates.
I think that's super reassuring for a lot of the people I speak to out there who have just come into the industry as junior SOC analysts or junior testers. They're really worried that automation is going to push them out. And I think as a planet, as humanity, that unskilled labor, especially with the advances in robotics you're seeing now. I mean, I saw some crazy videos the other day about a whole factory of humanoid robots that they've built to sort of assemble bits and pieces. Makes you wonder where those low-skilled workers are going to fit in. And you say there's 100 other jobs that you could get them to do. It's going to get to a point, though, isn't it, where unless you've got a certain level of intelligence, you're going to be out of the job market.
Yeah, but we say that Industrial Revolution was supposed to be the same problem. We didn't just have an entirely redundant workforce overnight. They were homeless. They were repositioned to different work. When the internet first launched, or big data, or we've seen these so many times through history. It doesn't just displace an entire people. Those people are redeployed. They might have to rediscover new skill sets or change what they're doing, but there is always a requirement for human workforce. The whole concept.
Unfortunately, though, our education system is still stuck in the basis of the Industrial Revolution, and I think we could probably do with improving that a little bit. But
that's a whole separate topic. I could spend hours on talking about IT being taught in schools in the UK and US, but let's not start that one.
It really is another one. Look, Jake, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to drop a couple of links in here for the folks who've tuned in. First one is Gutsy's website, if you want to have a check to see what it is they're up to. And the second one is, I hope you don't mind, Jake, a link to your LinkedIn profile.
No, if anyone's got any questions about the product or about me or about anything else in between, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk to anyone about anything or to help however I can. So
thank you so much. Any final wise words for our viewers before we jump off and have a cup of tea? Well, that's what I'm doing anyway.
I think the final wise words when I come back and say, you talk about changing roles and going into a startup, is in the security world and in, I think, careers in general, never be scared to jump into something new. It's never going backwards. It's never going forwards. It's just something new, and new can bring new challenges, and new challenges are exciting, and doing new things is exciting. So like I said, never be afraid. Disruption is a conned buzzword, but it's the reality of, I think, what makes life and work enjoyable.
Life is a constant disruption, isn't it? And I don't know who this was attributed to. I think 1 million people have been attributed to this quote. It's Darwin originally, but I don't think it was. Not the strongest nor the fittest, but the most adaptable, isn't it, that will survive. I've murdered.
And that answers the AI question as well.
It does. Yeah. Jake, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you in person again soon. Everyone, thank you for tuning in. We're back on Thursday. I'm back for one session in the evening with Gary Hibbard about the Real Cyber Awards here in the UK later this year. And earlier on in the day, Jay Tilson and John Spiegel from SSE Forum are talking about SASE in 2024. I'll be in the background pressing buttons because it's all a bit above my head. But Jake, thank you so much. Have an amazing day, everyone, and speak to you soon. Cheers.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.